Welcome back to Luke's Properties YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to discuss the mindset you need to go from £6,000 to £600,000. Let's get into it. So first, we're going to discuss the entrepreneurial mindset you need to succeed. Resilience is the ability to handle rejections and setbacks. So when I first started my rent-to-rent business, for the first 3 to 4 months, I used to drive up and down from London to Wales, view properties, offer on properties, only to be told the landlord doesn't want to accept your offer or your service isn't what the landlord's looking for. Basically, I did loads of free work, driving up and down the motorway, offering my services, getting told no, and not making any money. But through doing this, I learned the valuable lesson of resilience. I didn't let this stop me, and I kept going. And eventually, I got my first deal. So you have to learn to be resilient. The next trait that you need is a growth mindset. Once I got my first rent-to-rent property, estate agents started to send me deals. And because I was so keen, but still quite naive and new to the business, I used to take every deal that got offered to me. And the truth is, not every deal worked. Not every deal was the right deal. Whether it was the property that wasn't in good condition and couldn't attract good tenants, or the landlord just wasn't a good fit for me. Maybe we didn't have that synergy. Maybe they didn't quite understand the service. But for whatever reason, some of those deals didn't work. And I ended up giving those back and losing money. But rather than sulk or give up, I learned valuable lessons from those mistakes, which have made me a better businessman and a better entrepreneur. So by adopting a growth mindset, I didn't lose, I only learned, which in turn made me better. So your growth mindset is key. The next trait you need to develop is risk tolerance. Now, I put all of my savings into my rent-to-rent business 7 years ago, and a lot of people would have said that was risky. But as a result of doing that, I now have a multiple six-figure business. And what I've learned over that time is things are always going to seem risky in the beginning, but you need to have a risk tolerance. You need to have faith that the thing you're investing in and risking your capital in is going to work out and make you more money in the future. So what I learned over that 7-year period is there's always going to be risk, but taking calculated risk is what's allowed me to become successful. If you can do the numbers and do your due diligence, then you can take calculated risks that will make you successful in the future. And that famous old phrase comes to mind: no risk, no reward. The next trait you need to develop is adaptability. Now, there were many times in the early years of my rent-to-rent business where I had to adapt. The best example I can give you of this is early 2020 when the pandemic hit. Quite a lot of tenants left the properties because they couldn't work anymore. I had a lot of empty rooms. And to be honest, I was panicking a little bit because I guaranteed all this rent to all these landlords and I couldn't fulfill my service because I didn't have any tenants. But again, rather than throw the towel in and give up, I adjusted my strategy and I started targeting key workers. And after a few weeks of targeting only key workers, I had managed to fill all my properties again with nurses and doctors. So by adjusting, I actually made my business stronger because we still have some of those tenants today. And when I lost most of my tenants, I had two choices. I could give up or I could adapt. So adaptability is a key trait that you need to develop to become successful in entrepreneurship. Another key trait to develop is problem solving. The reason rent to rent works so well is because you're constantly solving problems. You're removing the landlord's problems, taking all those problems on yourself, and then you're building a system that can manage those problems. The problems are always going to be there. You just have to build a system and create a service that can handle those problems while still providing value to the landlord and the tenants. So problem solving is a huge thing that you're always going to be dealing with in entrepreneurship. The better you become at problem solving, the better your business will be. And finally, the two biggest entrepreneurial traits that are so important are consistency and discipline. There were many times in my journey where I wanted to give up. There were many times when I thought that landlords were never going to accept my offer, but I didn't let it stop me. I kept going. I kept tweaking my offer. I kept improving what I'd say to landlords. And then eventually I got some deals and then I started to build momentum from there. So by remaining consistent, still making my phone calls, still doing all of my outreach, still going on viewings, still building those relationships, especially in the early days when I wasn't making any money, I was doing it all for free. In fact, I was actually costing myself money driving up and down to Wales every minute, but I remained consistent and I kept my discipline. And by continuing to do the right things, eventually I got a breakthrough and then I built from there. But if I hadn't been consistent and I hadn't been disciplined, I wouldn't have carried on doing the things that were pushing the bar forward and getting me closer to building a successful business. I would have stopped and given up. So consistency and discipline to do the right things that are going to move you forward are key traits in building a successful business. Moving on then to the psychology of success. Now, you need to develop self-belief. You need to have confidence in your ability to succeed, even when others think you won't. So in the beginning, when you're just starting out and you're telling everyone about your amazing new rent-to-rent business, and they're all sort of looking at you like, I don't know about this, or that doesn't sound legal, or I don't think that's going to work. These are often the things that people around you say. All they're doing is projecting their own self-limiting beliefs onto you. You need to develop self-belief in the fact that what you're doing is going to work, and other people's opinions are completely irrelevant. So even though you may only have £5,000 to £10,000 saved, and even though you don't know much about property in the very beginning, you need to have enough self-belief to know that your work rate, your discipline, and your focus are going to make this work one way or another. The next point is cognitive flexibility. Now, this is similar to adaptability, being able to adapt in different scenarios, different situations. I made the earlier example about when the pandemic hit and how we had to adjust, but there's also been other points in the business where we've had to pivot and change our tenant type. There's been times where we've built a house share of individual like-minded professional tenants, and then a couple tenants leave later on down the line. You put two new tenants in, and then everyone's arguing, not getting along, and you've created a problem household. There's been times in the beginning where we used to rent smaller properties and try and rent them out by the room, only to realize that 3 to 4 bedroom houses can be quite tricky to fill by the room. Quite often you get friends in groups of 2, or it'll be like 5 or 6, but for some reason friends don't seem to come in groups of 3s and 4s. So there's been times where we've had to pivot our 3 or 4 bed houses into serviced accommodation Airbnb units and rent them out by the night. So by having cognitive flexibility, we've been able to pivot our strategy and make more money, which gives us another arm to our business and makes our portfolio more diverse. So it actually makes us stronger. So cognitive flexibility is a very, very important skill to develop. The next point is positive mental attitude. Now, like I said earlier, there's been many times where I've had to face rejection. I've had people telling me no. I've had people telling me go away. I've had people telling me don't contact them again. But never did I once allow myself to have a negative mental attitude. I would dust myself off, get back up and go again. And I would always stay optimistic. I would always know every time I got told no, it was moving me closer to being told yes. And by having this positive attitude, it allowed me to keep moving forward with the right energy, the energy that's going to bring everything I want towards me rather than repelling it with a negative attitude. So keeping a positive mental attitude is so, so important in entrepreneurship. Obviously, we all have our down days, right? But you need to have more up days than down days. And if there are moments where you're struggling and you're feeling negative about the whole thing, you need to be able to snap out of that as quickly as possible and get back into your positive mindset and start doing the things that are going to move you forward. So a positive mental attitude is very, very important. The next point is handling fear. Now, let me take you back 7 years ago. I was viewing my first rent-to-rent property. I remember it clearly. It was a 2-bedroom flat in Bellingham. I remember driving to the property. I had my script of what I was going to say. I was rehearsing it in the car. And then when I got outside the property, I just couldn't go in. I remember being so scared, thinking, what if this landlord sees straight through me? What if they can tell that I don't know what I'm talking about immediately? The imposter syndrome was real at this point, and my legs wouldn't move out of the car. I had built myself up to go on this first viewing, and I couldn't get out of the car. Imagine that. The fear of rejection was holding me back from even going into the flat and introducing myself. So I took about 10 minutes to myself outside the flat. I composed myself, and I went in, done the viewing. It was nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be. I spoke with the landlord briefly for 2 minutes, walked around the flat, took some pictures, and I left. So in that instance, I had to handle my fear and go on the viewing anyway. So my lesson to you would be, it's normal to feel like this. It's normal to feel apprehensive or fearful when you're doing anything new. But the trick is just to do it anyway. So even if you are scared, just wing it. Do the thing you need to do to move forward. Even if you are scared, just do it scared. Do it anyway. Once you do this over and over again, the fear goes away. I couldn't imagine ever being scared to go on a viewing today because I've done hundreds and hundreds of them. So you need to be able to handle fear. It's normal to feel fear, but you need to take the necessary steps to move forward. Do the things you need to do, even if you are scared. Just wing it, like I did. And the final point on the psychology of success is emotional intelligence. You need to be able to manage your emotions. There were times in the early days where I'd be negotiating with landlords for weeks, sometimes months. I'd get my hopes up and then they'd choose a different company or rent their property out themselves and turn my offer down. And there was a part of me that would feel very frustrated, quite resentful, and quite angry, to be honest. But by developing my emotional intelligence, I realized it's not personal. I just need to improve. And the fact that I've made my offer means that I'm being considered And that's a step forward from where I was before I even had a business. At least I was being considered by these landlords as a good option. So by developing my emotional intelligence, whenever I got told no, I wouldn't make a big deal about it. I would say, no problem. If you ever change your mind and you want to work with us, then you know where I am. And by doing this over and over again, what actually happened is 6 months, 9 months down the line, these same landlords came back to me asking me if my offer still stood. And because I hadn't reacted in a negative way 6 to 9 months previously, because of my emotional intelligence, I then ended up renting those same properties from those landlords. It just took me a little longer. You don't need to react to things all the time. You need to make your offers, build your relationships, and if you get told no, just move on. Leave the lines of communication open, and if they want to work with you in the future, then they will contact you. Don't ruin the relationship by sulking or having a negative attitude. Just move on. So here's some final points that summarize the entrepreneurial psychology that you have to develop if you want to build a successful rent-to-rent business. You have to have motivation. You have to have the ability to push through difficult days. Those days when people are wasting your time, those days when you're getting rejection after rejection after rejection. You have to keep motivated, and you have to know that those are just moments, and those moments will pass. Those moments are all part of the journey. You have to lose in order to win. And every time you face a rejection, you can't let it affect your motivation. You have to get up the next day and go again. Every day is a new opportunity, and we all have bad days. The trick is to dust yourself down and go again the next day with energy, with a positive mindset, and with focus. So motivation is huge. This is why you hear people say you need to have a reason why or a North Star. You need to have something to aim for that's bigger than just making money. For me, it's impact. I've always wanted to have an impact on this world. I've always wanted to make the most of my time here on this planet. I've always wanted to be successful at something. In my early years, it was football. As I grew older, it turned into entrepreneurship and business. So when you have a North Star and you have a big reason why, the down days, the bad days, the days when you face rejection, the days when things go wrong, you don't let that affect your motivation. Every day is a new opportunity, and the bad stuff has to happen so that the good stuff can happen. Once you understand this, your motivation stays high and your effort and your level of work remains consistent. And over time, things start to turn your way. The next point is focus and flow. Now in property, there's so many different strategies, so many different ways to make money within property. It can be quite easy to get distracted. 1 minute you're doing rent to rent, the next minute you're doing deal sourcing, the next minute you're trying to do lease options. There's so many different ways to make money, but the key is whichever strategy you choose, you need to stick at that. Nothing can stop a focused mind. You need to focus on your flow. You need to get yourself into a flow state where you're constantly doing outreach, you're constantly trying to get new clients, you're constantly trying to grow your business, and you're constantly making improvements. This is the flow state you need to be in. You're going to go a lot further, a lot faster if you're going in one direction rather than trying to go in multiple different directions. You often hear this phrase, the jack of all trades, the master of none. Don't spread yourself too thin. Focus on one thing, one strategy, one goal, and move forward in one direction. You will make so much more progress like this. There were many times in my journey where I looked on Instagram and I saw this person making this money from deal sourcing, this person making this money from developments, this other person making money from lease options. And it would have been quite easy for me to get shiny penny syndrome, to stop doing what I was doing with rent to rent and start doing these other strategies just because they looked like they were making more money than me. But what actually happened was I focused on my one strategy, which was rent to rent. I became successful at it, more successful than everyone else that I was looking at who was doing all these different strategies. So focus is so important. So ultimately, you need mental toughness. You need mental toughness to deal with setbacks, to deal with rejections, to deal with things that go wrong. This journey that you've embarked on isn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having is easy. But by learning and developing the entrepreneurial mindset, by being resilient, by having a growth mindset, by learning about risk tolerance, by having adaptability, by learning how to problem solve, and by being consistent and disciplined, you will succeed. You need to have self-belief. You need to develop cognitive flexibility. You need to have a positive mental attitude. You need to be able to handle fear, and you need to develop your emotional intelligence. You need motivation, focus, and mental toughness. If you've made it this far in the video, then you take your rent-to-rent journey seriously. And as a token of my appreciation for you watching the video this long, I've included a free rent-to-rent course in the video description below. Take the course as it will help further your rent-to-rent education. And it's free, so why wouldn't you? If you want to watch another video where I break down how to build your rent-to-rent business step by step, then watch this video next. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.